woman left her work and vanished without a trace under strange circumstances. Police joined the search and quickly uncovered several chilling clues suggesting something terrible might have happened to her. But despite their efforts, the investigation dragged on for 25 long years, and only recently did an unexpected breakthrough finally reveal the shocking truth. Kim Langwell was born on December 24, 1965 in Houston, Texas. She grew up there with her parents and sister, surrounded by friends, and was known for her determination from a young age. At the age of 18, Kim gave birth to her daughter, Tiffany. But shortly after, Tiffany's father left them, so Kim had to raise her daughter on her own. She moved to a town called Beaumont, hoping to start fresh and build a stable life for herself and Tiffany. At first, it wasn't easy. Kim often had to juggle 3 jobs at once just to make ends meet. But eventually, she landed a good position at a local oil refinery, which gave her more time to focus on her daughter. At this job, Kim also met a man named Kim. The two started dating, and before long, they got engaged, excited to plan their future together. On July 9, 1999, 34-year-old Kim had plans to spend the evening at a restaurant with Ken and her 15-year-old daughter Tiffany. That day, she was scheduled to finish her shift at work around 5 p.m., head home, and then go to the restaurant. At around 5:15, Kim called Tiffany to tell her about those plans. She also mentioned that she had some things to do before heading home and might be a little late. By 6:30, Kim arrived at her house, but Kim, for some reason, still wasn't there. He and Tiffany tried calling her, but she didn't answer, which was quite unusual for her. As the hours passed with no sign of Kim, Kim became increasingly worried. Finally, at around 10 p.m., he decided to search for her. He drove along the route Kim would have taken from work to home, checked local stores, and stopped by other places she might have been. But there was no trace of her anywhere. Ken kept searching until he spotted Kim's car parked outside a pharmacy, but Kim herself was nowhere to be found. He looked around the area, hoping to find her, but there was no sign of her anywhere near the pharmacy. At first, Ken thought maybe she'd changed her mind about dinner and gone somewhere else. It crossed his mind that she could have left with a friend and decided to leave her car there, even though it didn't make much sense to him. Still, he convinced himself that she was probably fine and headed home. The next morning, Ken drove back to the pharmacy and saw that Kim's car was still sitting in the parking lot. She also hadn't come home overnight and hadn't contacted anyone. At that point, his worry turned into fear. Realizing something was seriously wrong, Ken decided to call the police. After hearing all of this, the officers immediately got to work. Their first step was to examine Kim's car. There were no signs of a struggle or blood inside, but they did find something unsettling. Her cell phone was left behind. Next, they spoke with Kim's daughter, Tiffany, who had been the last person to speak with her. Tiffany explained that after work, her mom had planned to stop by the house of a man named Terry, with whom she'd been in a relationship for 7 years. Even though they had broken up over 6 months earlier, Terry still kept in touch with Kim from time to time. That evening, he asked her to help him with a repair project. He needed someone to hold a few shelves while he mounted them to the wall. Tiffany said she called Terry on the night her mom disappeared, but he told her Kim had only stopped by for a few minutes and left. When the police spoke with Kim's friends, they learned that her relationship with Terry had been anything but smooth. At first, when Kim started dating him, her friends thought he seemed like a decent guy, but that impression didn't last long. Over time, Terry's behavior became more aggressive and controlling. He constantly called Kim, demanding to know where she was and who she was with. He insisted that she obey him and frequently caused arguments over the smallest things. Eventually, Kim decided to end this relationship, but breaking up with Terry wasn't easy. He tried to stop her in every way possible. Sometimes he promised to change, and other times he threatened to hurt her if she left him. Despite his efforts, Kim finally managed to walk away. After that, didn't do anything crazy to get her back, but he continued to stay in contact with her. Kim was afraid to completely cut him off, worrying that if she did, he might harm her or her daughter. From conversations with Kim's friends, police uncovered even darker details about her relationship with Terry. Shortly before their breakup, he had become physically violent, even going as far as choking her during an argument. After that incident, Kim became genuinely afraid that one day Terry might take things even further. At one point, she confided in her friends, saying that if she ever disappeared, they should start looking for her in Terry's backyard. All this information, combined with the fact that Kim had visited Terry shortly before she vanished, made investigators take a hard look at him as a possible suspect. But when they questioned Terry, he denied any involvement in her disappearance. He told police that Kim had only stopped by for a few minutes to help him mount the shelves and left. Terry also claimed that about 4 hours after Kim's visit, he went to a local bar and spent the rest of the evening there. This meant Terry had no alibi for the time Kim went missing, and his motive seemed clear. Investigators got a warrant to search his home and combed through his property, but they found nothing. No trace of Kim, no belongings, no blood, nothing to link Terry to her disappearance. Forensic experts also examined Kim's car but didn't find any clues either. In the end, police couldn't uncover any evidence linking Terry to her disappearance or anything that could explain what happened to Kim. But soon, a new suspect entered the picture. Kim's friends revealed that she had repeatedly complained about her boss, Frank. Not long after she started working for him, Frank began showing her unwanted attention. He openly flirted with her despite being married. As time went on, Frank began writing her love letters, trying to convince her to start a relationship with him. In total, he sent more than 100 letters. The whole situation made Kim uneasy. She was afraid Frank might fire her one day just because she didn't feel the same way. In fact, Kim had been so uneasy about the situation that she gave all of Frank's letters to her close friends, asking to hold on to them in case anything ever happened to her. The police reviewed Frank's letters, and their content made it clear he was completely obsessed with Kim. On top of that, Kim had confided in her friends that Frank would slowly drive past her house several times a day. Sometimes he'd even park across the street and just watch her. What made the situation even more bizarre was that Kim's current boyfriend, also worked at the same company, but that didn't seem to bother Frank at all. Given all this, investigators began seriously considering Frank as a suspect. Kim had vanished shortly after leaving work, and Frank had more than one motive for doing something like that. First, his obsession with her could have escalated to the point where he decided to abduct her. Second, he may have feared that Kim might expose him either to their employer or to his wife. Either scenario could have caused him serious trouble, giving him a strong reason to silence her. The police decided to question Frank, but he claimed he didn't have any strong feelings for Kim, describing it as nothing more than a fleeting crush that had long passed. He also denied writing her any letters, despite the fact that investigators had all of them in their possession. Frank's behavior struck the detectives as odd, and they weren't quick to take him at his word. He also claimed to have an alibi, but that raised even more questions. Frank provided a receipt from a store showing he'd been there at 6:56 p.m. However, in theory, he still had enough time to abduct Kim before that. Later that evening, Frank hosted a poker game with some friends who confirmed he was with them during that time. But there was still a window of over an hour between the time Kim left work and when Frank's alibi kicked in, a period for which he had no explanation. Despite their efforts, the police couldn't find any evidence linking Frank to Kim's disappearance, so they shifted their focus to other potential leads. Investigators tried to locate surveillance footage from cameras along Kim's route, from her home to Terry's house and then to the parking lot where her car was found. But this effort yielded no results. They also reviewed her phone records and discovered that her last call had been to her daughter, with no further activity afterward. The detectives then concentrated on search efforts, scouring the city and its outskirts. Volunteers joined in and police made a public appeal, asking anyone with information to come forward. Yet, despite these efforts, they made no progress. At the same time, more reports about Terry's odd behavior started to surface. Just days after Kim's disappearance, her sister decided to confront him at his home, as both she and the rest of Kim's family strongly suspected him. However, Terry appeared not only indifferent to Kim's fate, but went as far as openly mocking her relatives, showing no sign of concern for the missing woman. Another interesting observation came from Terry's employees. He owned a small business and his office was located on his property. His workers frequently came by. One of them reported that on the day Kim disappeared, he arrived at Terry's house around 5:50 p.m., and Kim's car was parked outside. However, he didn't see Kim herself. Considering that Kim had left work around 5:15 p.m., this raised some serious questions. Terry had claimed that she only stopped by for a few minutes, but his employee's account clearly contradicted that. Soon after, the police received another lead. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a tow truck owned by Terry near the parking lot where Kim's car was eventually found. According to them, the tow truck was there at around 6:45 p.m., which didn't align with Terry's alibi of being home all evening. Despite these suspicious details, there still wasn't any solid evidence linking Terry to Kim's disappearance. Investigators kept searching for more clues, but ultimately, the case would drag on for years. Kim's family never stopped believing that Terry was responsible for her disappearance, and by then, no one held out hope that she would be found alive. Her sister also told police that Terry continued acting strangely. At one point, he called them and said he was planning to take a polygraph test to clear his name. But then he casually added that he would probably fail it. On top of that, Terry occasionally called the family to ask if they had heard from Kim, as if she had simply gone away for a while instead of vanishing without a trace. And if that wasn't unsettling enough, someone had been calling Kim's relatives for years, only to stay silent on the other end of the line. The family was convinced Terry was behind it, but once again, the police couldn't find anything to tie him to Kim's disappearance. 3 years later, another strange incident involving Terry raised suspicions again. He approached Tiffany on the street and started asking if she had heard anything from her mother. Kim's sister stepped in and told him to leave. In response, Terry said something like, "Aren't you curious about which polygraph question I failed? It was the one where they asked if I killed Kim." Kim's family immediately contacted the police again, but their response was the same. Without solid evidence, they couldn't confirm Terry's involvement. From that point on, the case completely stalled. 8 years later, investigators reopened it and reviewed everything from scratch, but it led nowhere. Terry, by then, had stopped cooperating with the authorities and flat out refused to answer any more questions. This went on for many years, until early 2024, when the Oxygen True Crime documentary team took an interest in Kim's case. They decided to create an episode about her disappearance and launch their own investigation. They interviewed Kim's friends and family before turning their attention to the two main suspects, Frank and Terry. Frank agreed to answer all their questions, but even 25 years after Kim's disappearance, his behavior was still quite unusual. He continued to deny ever pursuing Kim romantically or writing her love letters. Once again, he insisted he had nothing to do with her disappearance. With little progress, the team shifted their focus to Terry. Unlike Frank, Terry refused to speak with them, but they didn't give up and decided to confront him in person. When they arrived at his house, Terry saw them through a window and immediately ran out the back door, apparently trying to escape in his car. Unfortunately for him, the crew blocked his path, leaving Terry no choice but to answer their questions. He claimed he hadn't seen them and wasn't trying to run, even though his actions suggested the opposite. Terry then insisted he had no reason to harm Kim, saying he wasn't bothered at all by her leaving him. This directly contradicted what Kim's friends and family had told investigators. She had often mentioned threats and erratic behavior from Terry. Things took an even stranger turn when Terry began contradicting his own original statements. Initially, he told police that Kim had stopped by to help him put up shelves. Now, he claimed she'd only come to pick up the rest of her belongings from his house. The contradiction caught the attention of investigators, prompting them to reopen the case. After the documentary aired, prosecutors decided to take a bold step. They prepared to charge Terry with murder, even though they still lacked solid evidence tying him directly to Kim's disappearance. Almost no one doubted his involvement by this point. Investigators hoped that during the trial, new evidence would surface or that the jury would find Terry's suspicious behavior enough to convict him. However, just as prosecutors were finalizing their case, something unexpected happened. A witness came forward after watching the documentary, and their testimony changed everything. According to this individual, Terry had once told him that he had killed his ex-girlfriend and buried her body on his property. With this new information, police secured a warrant to search Terry's property and arrived with a team of forensic experts. For days, dozens of people combed through the area using high-level ground-penetrating radars. Finally, they made a breakthrough. The radar revealed a section of the concrete floor beneath Terry's bedroom was about the size of a human body. Oddly, pieces of rebar had been cut out of this spot, even though the rest of the foundation was fully reinforced. Investigators began digging and soon uncovered a blanket buried in the ground. Inside, they found human remains. They were sent to forensic experts who quickly confirmed what everyone had already suspected. The remains belonged to Kim. Right after this discovery, Terry was arrested and charged with murder. With Kim's body now found beneath his bedroom, the prosecution finally had the evidence they needed to secure a conviction. As of now, 67-year-old Terry remains in jail, awaiting his trial, which is scheduled for the spring of 2025. In addition to the criminal charges, Kim's daughter has filed a civil lawsuit against him, seeking compensation and aiming to strip Terry of the financial means to fund his defense in the criminal case. It's worth noting that following Terry's arrest, the original investigative team faced heavy criticism. As we know, Kim had told her friends that if she ever went missing, they should look for her on Terry's property, and 25 years later, her body was found exactly where she said it would be. To this day, it's unclear why Terry's house and property weren't thoroughly searched back then. Perhaps investigators did check the yard but found no signs of recent digging. It's also unknown when exactly Terry buried her under his bedroom. It's possible he initially hid her body elsewhere and only moved it under the house after police had completed their initial search. Regardless, Terry now has almost no chance of escaping justice, and Kim's family has finally been able to give her a proper burial. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section. And don't forget to press the like button if you are enjoying my video. A girl set out to sell cookies to her neighbors and vanished without a trace. Within hours, hundreds of local residents joined the search, and as time passed, even more people showed up. Together with the police, they combed every corner of the neighborhood, but they couldn't find her. Days went by, and it seemed like she had disappeared without a trace, until detectives uncovered the shocking truth. This revelation would not only shake the town to its core, but also set off a chain of events with consequences still felt to this day. Joan D'Alessandro was born on September 7, 1965, in the quiet town of Hillsdale, New Jersey. She had loving parents and two older brothers. Their family lived in a peaceful suburban neighborhood and was deeply religious. From an early age, Joan regularly attended her local church, and later she enrolled in a Baptist elementary school. Joan quickly made a lot of friends and did great in her classes. She also developed a love for ballet and really started to get into the arts. At about the same time, Joan joined the Girl Scouts, spending a lot of time outdoors with other girls, picking up some valuable life skills, socializing, and just having fun. One of their main activities was selling cookies. The girls would go door to door in their neighborhoods asking people to buy them. April 19th, 1973 was Clean Thursday and Joan's school had the day off. The 7-year-old spent it at home with her mom, mostly playing in the yard. Around 3 p.m., she saw one of her neighbors pull into the driveway. Some of the neighbors had pre-ordered cookies, and Joan would deliver the boxes once they were ready. By that afternoon, she only had a few deliveries left. So, without wasting any time, Joan ran inside, grabbed a few boxes, and headed out. She told her mom she'd be back in a few minutes. But as time passed and Joan didn't return, her mom started to worry. At first, she assumed Joan might have bumped into some neighborhood kids and lost track of time playing with them. Their neighborhood was quiet and considered very safe, and back then, kids often played outside unsupervised. But when an hour passed and Joan still hadn't returned, her mom started to think something might be wrong. By then, it had started raining, and she thought Joan might have taken shelter at a friend's house to wait out the bad weather. The rain stopped pretty quickly, but Joan was still nowhere to be found. Soon after, her dad came home from work and his wife told him she couldn't find Joan. He immediately got in his car and started driving around the neighborhood, looking for her, but there was no sign of Joan anywhere. Meanwhile, Joan's mom tried to find the list of addresses where her daughter was supposed to deliver cookies, but realized Joan had probably taken it with her. However, she remembered something Joan had said just before leaving. She hadn't mentioned which neighbor she was going to, but she had said that the person had just pulled into their driveway in a new car. Her mom immediately thought of a family who lived just a few houses down, as they were the only ones in the neighborhood with a new vehicle. While her husband continued searching the streets, she decided to check with those neighbors and visit some other houses where Joan might have dropped off cookies. Joan's mother visited several neighbors, but all of them said they hadn't seen the girl that day. Frustrated and increasingly alarmed, she returned home, and when her husband told her he hadn't found any sign of her daughter either, they decided it was time to call the police. After hearing Joan's mother's story, officers jumped right into action and launched a large-scale search operation. The local fire department joined in, sending out crews to help, while the police went door to door in a several-mile radius, hoping someone might have seen Joan or could point them in the right direction. But no one had spotted the girl. This was quite odd, especially since the street leading away from Joan's house was a main road that led to a busy shopping center. Cars were constantly coming and going, yet no one had noticed a young girl walking in the area. As word of Joan's disappearance spread through the neighborhood, dozens of local residents began joining the search. Many of them knew Joan's family well and were eager to help in any way they could. The number of people involved in the search grew by the hour. By midnight, local officers requested assistance from the FBI and state police. Search dogs were brought in to track Joan's scent using her belongings, but the efforts led nowhere. Volunteers combed through abandoned lots, empty houses, nearby forests, parks, and even the shores of a local lake. But despite their dedication, there was no trace of Joan. At first, police considered the possibility that Joan might have wandered too far from home and gotten lost. But by the middle of the night, it became clear that the situation was far more serious. If she had simply lost her way, she likely would have been found by then. This led investigators to suspect foul play. Joan's mother dismissed any chance that her daughter had left somewhere voluntarily. Joan never wandered far from home without permission and always returned when she was supposed to. That day, she'd promised to be back in just a few minutes, so her mom was convinced something terrible had happened. Around 3 a.m., the police decided to take a break from the search and resume at sunrise. By morning, even more volunteers had joined in. It felt like the whole town had come together to look for Joan. Women who were home with their own children also found ways to help, preparing over 2,000 meals for the search teams throughout the day. Along with the local community, nearly every officer from the police department was involved, as well as about 250 firefighters from nearby towns and a few FBI teams. That day, searchers combed through every inch of the area. They entered every home, checked every yard, garage, shed, basically anywhere Joan could possibly be, but despite their exhaustive efforts, they found no trace of her. The search went on until one of the teams spotted a child's shoe less than a mile from Joan's home. It looked very much like the ones Joan had been wearing when she left the house. But that wasn't all. Near the shoe were several empty boxes of the same cookies Joan had been selling. Police immediately showed the shoes to Joan's mother, but the moment she saw it, she said it didn't belong to her daughter. On top of that, investigators examined the cookie boxes and concluded they had likely been there for several weeks. Eventually, some local residents came forward and identified the shoe. It belonged to their child. So this lead was ruled out and investigators were back to square one. Despite their determination and the support of hundreds of volunteers, the day's search once again ended without answers. Meanwhile, the FBI began focusing heavily on the possibility of foul play. After speaking with Joan's mother, they learned that she had already visited all the neighbors where Joan might have delivered cookies. Each of them said that Joan had not come to their house, and there was no trace of the girl or the cookies anywhere. However, Joan's mother shared something else with the detectives, a gut feeling she had about one particular neighbor. As we know, before leaving the house, Joan mentioned she was going to deliver cookies to a neighbor who had just pulled into their driveway in a brand new car. The only neighbors who had recently purchased a vehicle were the McGowans. So Joan's mother went straight to their house. She was met by 26-year-old Joseph McGowan, who lived there with his mother and grandmother. He claimed he hadn't seen Joan, but something about him felt off. Joan's mom couldn't put her finger on it. She just had a bad feeling about him. The detectives had already spoke with Joseph, but he denied having anything to do with Joan's disappearance. Still, they couldn't ignore some red flags. He seemed to struggle with his own story, constantly tripping over details about his alibi for the time Joan went missing. But despite their suspicions, there wasn't any physical evidence in his home linking him to the case. Joseph also had no criminal record. It was actually quite the opposite. He worked as a school chemistry teacher and had a great reputation in the community. Still, as the hours turned into days, the detectives' gut feeling about him only grew stronger. Eventually, they brought him into the station for a polygraph test, and Joseph agreed to answer their questions. The results weren't what he was hoping for. The operator flagged multiple signs of deception on nearly every key question. However, the police couldn't use the polygraph results as solid evidence of his guilt. Instead, they informed Joseph about his failure and kept pressing him to tell the truth. Eventually, to the surprise of the detectives, their persistence paid off, and in a quite unexpected way, Joseph broke down and asked them to bring a priest to the station. After speaking with the priest in private, Joseph finally confessed to what happened that day. According to his story, he had been mowing the lawn outside his house when Joan approached him with a few boxes of cookies. He said he had ordered them a couple weeks earlier, so he invited Joan inside to pay for them. From this point, Joseph's account took a strange turn. According to his words, he suddenly realized he didn't have the exact amount of cash to pay her, which, for some unknown reason, deeply upset him. Feeling ashamed, he grabbed Joan and dragged her to his bedroom, where he struck her multiple times and subjected her to other horrifying acts. The detectives, of course, didn't buy this part of his story for even a second, but they let him continue his confession. After committing these horrific acts, Joseph suddenly realized the gravity of what he'd done and started panicking about what to do next. He knew that if he let Joan go, it would destroy his life, so he decided to get rid of her. After several failed attempts, Joseph killed Joan, wrapped her body in an old sofa cover and placed it in the trunk of his car. Then, he cleaned up the blood in his bedroom, stuffed the cleaning rags into a bag, and drove to a national park in neighboring New York State about 20 miles from his home. At the park, he carried Joan's body into a wooded area and hid it behind a large rock. On his way back, he also disposed of the evidence in random trash bins along the road. Shortly after he returned home, Joan's mother came by looking for her daughter. Later, Joseph even joined the search efforts for the missing girl along hundreds of locals. After finishing his confession, Joseph says something quite unsettling. He told the police that, despite everything he'd done, he was completely calm that night and had no trouble falling asleep at all. While parts of Joseph's story immediately raised questions, investigators prioritized finding Joan's body. They contacted New York's Park Services and Joseph gave them detailed directions to the location. Thanks to this, the search took less than an hour. Joan's body was discovered behind a large rock in a remote, wooded area. Once medical examiners began their work, more inconsistencies in Joseph's story came to light. During his interrogation, Joseph insisted he didn't SA Joan, but forensic experts found undeniable evidence to the contrary. As for the rest, they did find numerous injuries and bruises, and his description of the cause of death aligned with reality. Another glaring contradiction in Joseph's account was the fact that Joan's body was completely unclothed. Yet even when detectives confronted him with this detail, Joseph continued to deny anything related to SA. For Joseph's family and friends, the entire situation was a complete shock. They had always seen him as a decent, kind person and couldn't believe he was capable of something so horrific. His colleagues at the elementary school where he worked as a chemistry teacher were equally stunned. To them, Joseph was a talented and well-educated teacher who had never caused any trouble. As for the residents of their town, dozens of them began gathering outside Joseph's house in the days following his arrest. While most didn't act aggressively, police decided to block off the entire street as a precaution, fearing someone might try to harm his mother or grandmother. Some residents were so outraged by what had happened that they even started flipping through phone books looking for people with the last name McGowan and calling them to unleash their anger. None of these individuals had any connection to Joseph, yet incidents like this became common. Several families even filed complaints saying these calls were making their lives unbearable. Soon, community was enraged even more because the judge decided to set Joseph's bail at $50,000 after his arrest. While that was a huge amount of money for the time, people were furious. Hundreds of them flooded the court with angry letters demanding the bail be revoked, insisting that Joseph should remain behind bars. The thought of him potentially walking free and living just a few houses away from his victim's family was unthinkable. But not everyone opposed the idea of Joseph being released on bail. Some residents were actually eager for him to get out, so they could take justice into their own hands. Under immense pressure, the court eventually changed his decision and revoked Joseph's bail, even though his family had already managed to gather the necessary amount. In the end, he was kept in jail to await trial and placed in solitary confinement for his own safety. As other inmates were eager to harm him, the trial began several months after Joseph's arrest, and he pleaded guilty to the murder. However, he continued to deny the fact of SA and insisted that the crime was a spontaneous act. According to him, he didn't understand what had come over him, but the prosecution wasn't buying it. Before the trial, several psychiatrists evaluated Joseph, and they all concluded that he had harbored dark, monstrous desires for many years. He had managed to hide these urges, presenting himself as a normal and well-adjusted person, but the moment he had the chance to act on his fantasies, he didn't hesitate a second. There was also speculation suggesting that Joseph had planned something like this in advance. The fact that Joan's body was hidden deep in the woods behind a large rock raised serious doubts that he had chosen the spot on a whim. Investigators strongly believed he had known about the location long before the crime and kept it in his mind as a convenient place to dispose of a body. At the end of the trial, Joseph was sentenced to life in prison, but there was a catch. The laws at the time allowed for parole even for someone like him, which meant the case was far from over. Nearly 20 years later, Joseph became eligible to apply for parole, causing outrage among Joan's family. Her parents said they hadn't even known this was an option. To make matters worse, their attorney warned them that if they didn't take action to oppose his release, there was a strong chance Joseph would walk free. The problem was that over the years, Joseph had undergone multiple evaluations with psychiatrists, all of whom concluded that he was no longer a threat to society and could be released. Adding to his case was his spotless behavior throughout his time in prison. As a result, Joan's mother was forced to do everything in her power to convince the judge and others in the parole system that Joseph did not deserve to be released. At the same time, she decided to push for changes in the law to ensure that parole would never be an option for criminals like Joseph. And after many years of relentless effort, she succeeded. A new law was passed in New Jersey that made anyone convicted of murdering a person under 14 for the purposes of SA ineligible for parole under any circumstances. Just a year later, a federal version of this law passed, mostly thanks to Joan's mother's tireless advocacy. As for Joseph, he didn't fall under the jurisdiction of the new laws. However, Joan's mother still managed to convince the court to deny his parole. But in 1999, another chance for his release came up, and this time something unexpected happened. Before the decision was made, Joseph underwent another evaluation with a psychiatrist, whose job was to assess his mental state. During these conversations, Joseph suddenly changed the story he had been sticking to for over 20 years. Initially, he had claimed that he attacked Joan out of frustration when he couldn't find the right amount of change. That story had never been particularly convincing, but now Joseph admitted that wasn't how it happened at all. According to Joseph, he had been going through personal struggles during that period of time. He was unsatisfied with his life, unhappy with his job, and generally miserable, which left his mind in a pretty dark state. When Joan came to his door with cookies, he claimed he just decided to take out his anger on her, leading him to commit the crime. Despite this new explanation, the court once again denied his parole. Over the following years, Joseph continued to petition for early release, but each time, the outcome was the same. His requests were rejected. During one of his attempts to secure parole, Joseph gave an interview to John Douglas, a former FBI agent and author whose work inspired characters in The Silence of the Lambs and the series like Hannibal and Mindhunter. Douglas, known for interviewing infamous serial killers like Charles Manson, agreed to assess whether Joseph was fit to re-enter society. After their conversation, Douglas concluded that Joseph posed a significant danger to anyone around him, describing his uncontrollable urge to kill as deeply concerning. Using his unique approach, Douglas managed to earn Joseph's trust, uncovering something quite troubling in the process. At some point, Joseph boasted about having over $600,000. He explained that after his mother and grandmother passed away, he received sizable payouts and sold their house. But here's the kicker. Joseph revealed he had moved all the money to a bank in neighboring New York State to ensure that Joan's mother couldn't touch a single penny through civil lawsuits, leaving him with plenty of money to pay for legal representation. Douglas was so struck by this interview, he later wrote an entire book about it. Joseph's last attempt to secure parole was in 2008, with his next hearing scheduled for 2025. Joan's mother was preparing to oppose his release once again, but she didn't have to. Joseph passed away in 2021 at the age of 74. In the end, he spent most of his life behind bars and remained there until his death. As for Joan's mother, she continues her fight against criminals like the one that took her daughter. A few years ago, she successfully pushed to raise the age limit in her original law from 14 to 18 in New Jersey. She also helped pass another law in the state that completely removed the statute of limitations for murder cases. In addition to that, she founded a non-profit organization dedicated to helping children, which has achieved remarkable results over the years. Joan's mother plans to keep building on this work, both to honor her daughter's memory and to protect thousands of other children. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button if you are enjoying my video so far. This is the case of a college student who went back to her hometown and disappeared without a trace. At first, the police thought she had gone somewhere, but soon they began finding extremely disturbing clues. Her fate remained unknown for 16 years until the truth suddenly came to light in an unexpected way. Rebecca Gould was born on April 28, 1982, in the small American town of Melbourne, Arkansas. She had 3 sisters, but shortly after the youngest was born, their parents divorced. The girls stayed with their mother, but continued to spend time with their dad. At first, they struggled with their parents' separation, but eventually, it made them even closer with each other. They spent a lot of time together, always looking out for one another. After graduating from high school, Rebecca enrolled at Northwest Arkansas Community College and relocated to Fayetteville. One of her sisters was already attending this college, so they had the opportunity to see each other practically every day. The sisters always tried to visit their family whenever they had the chance. Even though their home was just about 25 miles from their college, sometimes it was quite challenging to find time between studies. In September 2004, when Rebecca was 22, she was anticipating the start of a new semester at her college. For a while, she had been considering transferring to the University of Arkansas, and finally she got the opportunity. However, before making the move, Rebecca planned to complete one more semester at her current college. Before the semester began, she and her sister decided to go home for the weekend to visit their family. Rebecca also had a boyfriend who lived in a nearby town. She planned to spend time with her relatives and then stay with her boyfriend. On Sunday, September 19th, the sisters drove home, spent some time with their loved ones, and Rebecca left to see her boyfriend. The next day, she was supposed to pick up her sister and head back, as they had come there in Rebecca's car. However, she didn't show up at the agreed time. Her sister tried calling multiple times, but Rebecca never answered. At first, her family members didn't worry too much. Rebecca was an adult and they thought maybe she was just catching up on sleep before heading back to college or spending time with some friends. But by the evening, as time had passed with no sign of Rebecca, her family started to worry. They now hoped Rebecca had just decided to stay in town for one more day and would eventually return home. The next day, their worry reached its peak. Rebecca still hadn't contacted any of her relatives, and none of her friends had seen her. That's when Rebecca's mom decided to contact the police. Officers learned that Rebecca had stayed with her boyfriend, Casey, and went to his workplace. He said the last time he saw her was the previous morning, around 8:30 a.m. Rebecca dropped him off at the cafe where he worked. She then planned to return to his place, pack her things, and meet up with her sisters before leaving. Casey added that Rebecca had promised to pick him up from work, but she never showed. He waited for her in the parking lot, then called his friends, and they all went to a party. The police listened to his account and asked Casey to allow them to search his home, and he gave them permission. The first thing they noticed was Rebecca's car was still parked outside. Inside the house, they found her purse with IDs and her dog. Casey also mentioned she had a small suitcase with some clothes, but it was not found in the house. This started to seem odd. No one had seen Rebecca for a whole day, yet her purse, car, and beloved pet were still at Casey's place. But it wasn't all. One of the officers noticed the mattress didn't have any bedding and was placed on the bed rather unevenly. Lifting it, the police found large red stains resembling blood. The officers then searched the house more thoroughly and found more blood stains on the floor and wallpaper. In the washing machine, they found bedding with blood stains. They also noticed a significant amount of bleach bottles in the house, suggesting that someone had attempted to clean up bloodstains. All this pointed to a grim conclusion that Rebecca might not be alive anymore, although investigators couldn't find any additional evidence in the house. They also weren't sure if the blood belonged to her, as DNA analysis results would take several days. While forensic experts continued to examine the house, detectives began questioning Rebecca's boyfriend. He could have been the last person to see her before her disappearance, and a large amount of blood was found in his house. Casey stated he had no involvement in Rebecca's disappearance. According to him, the last time he saw her was the previous morning, and since then, Rebecca hadn't been in touch. He mentioned that after spending the night with friends, he returned home to change before his next shift. However, he insisted he hadn't seen any blood splatters on the floor or walls and didn't smell bleach. He also didn't think much of Rebecca's car parked outside or some of her belongings left in the room. The police didn't rush to take his word for it, but at that point, they didn't have any substantial evidence to suspect him of murder. They decided to interview all his friends with whom Casey spent Monday night, and they confirmed that he was indeed with them until the morning. They provided him with an alibi, and the police continued to look for any other clues. They still had no idea what happened to Rebecca and when exactly she disappeared. All they knew was that she hadn't answered any calls since the morning of the previous day. During the conversation with investigators, Casey had suggested they should look into Rebecca's ex-boyfriend named Justin. The police tried to reach out to him, but he wasn't home and didn't answer any calls. This seemed suspicious. He disappeared at the same time as his ex-girlfriend. However, 2 days later, he got in touch and said he had been at a casino with his father. The police were able to confirm his alibi, and he was indeed out of town. Soon, detectives got another lead. They had been trying to reconstruct the timeline of events on the day of her disappearance and found out Rebecca had stopped at a gas station near Casey's workplace. She bought herself a sandwich for breakfast and headed towards his house. Employees recognized her from a photo and confirmed she came there after 8:30 a.m., aligning with Casey's account. The police also found the same sandwich in his house, untouched. This indicated that Rebecca returned home, and shortly after that, something happened to her. Considering Casey was at work at this time, it once again raised doubts about his involvement. Soon, the police received the results of the blood analysis found in his house. It matched Rebecca's blood, and experts didn't find any samples of foreign DNA among it. Detectives continued their efforts to solve the case. By interviewing all of Rebecca's relatives and friends, they considered that if Rebecca was indeed attacked, it could have been someone close to her with a personal motive. Police also scrutinized all of Casey's friends who might have visited his house, but all efforts yielded no results. This went on until September 27th. A week after her disappearance, investigators discovered Rebecca's body approximately 12 miles from her boyfriend's house. It lay at the base of an embankment near the highway. This area wasn't visible from the road, making it nearly impossible to stumble upon the body accidentally. They also noted that whoever left her there hadn't even tried to conceal or bury the body. Apparently, the perpetrator just drove there, dumped her and left. Medical experts determined that Rebecca sustained multiple blows to the head with a heavy object and her cause of death was strangulation. No defensive wounds were found on her body, indicating that the victim was completely caught off guard, possibly without even having time to realize what was happening. Experts also found no evidence of sexual assault. Regarding the time of death, they also thought Rebecca's body had been lying there for a week, but experts couldn't provide a more precise estimation. Meanwhile, the detectives identified the possible murder weapon used by the perpetrator. There was a piano in Casey's house missing one of its legs. They were quite heavy, and medical experts confirmed that their shape matched the head injury on the victim. Casey claimed the missing leg had been loose for a while, and in theory, it could have been easily ripped from its base. However, the police failed to find this leg either in the house or near the location where the body was found. Given the complete absence of evidence, detectives began searching for possible motives for this crime. They immediately ruled out the robbery gone wrong. Nothing was missing from the house except for the piano leg and Rebecca's suitcase. A sexual motive was also dismissed, leading investigators to believe that the killer simply wanted to murder her. Considering Rebecca was killed almost immediately after her return to Casey's house, police speculated that the perpetrator might have been aware of her schedule or had been following her, knowing her boyfriend would be at work that morning. It was also very likely that Rebecca knew the perpetrator. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting she might have let them in herself. According to investigators, the killer spent several hours in the house attempting to clean up the blood with bleach. After that, they likely carried the body and loaded it into the car to drive it to the embankment. Despite all this, detectives had literally no evidence, so there was no progress in the investigation. They considered the possible involvement of hundreds of people, including acquaintances and relatives of both Rebecca and Casey. They also checked neighbors and even residents of nearby towns, but it led nowhere. Police received numerous tips, but none proved useful. In many cases, locals just voiced their suspicions against other people without backing it up with any real facts. This went on for several months until the case eventually went cold. Investigators continued to work on it, but they couldn't make any progress. In the following years, the case was reopened several times, passing on to new teams of detectives. But each time, it led nowhere. The problem lay not only in the complete absence of evidence, but also in the lack of understanding the perpetrator's motive. Eventually, the mysterious nature of this case attracted attention from the true crime community. It became the subject of various TV shows and podcasts where people attempted to finally uncover the truth. One such individual was a journalist named George Jarrett who had been following the case from the beginning. He even wrote a book about it and launched his own podcast. For many years, he had been trying to find out who killed Rebecca. One day, he met Jennifer Buchholz, a former counterintelligence officer in the U.S. Army who was also interested in the case. They decided to join forces and created a Facebook group where they shared their thoughts on the investigation, discussing it with subscribers. In the first few months, they started noticing a subscriber named William Miller, who caught their attention for two reasons. The first was that he lived in the Philippines. His interest in an unsolved crime in a small American town from the other side of the world seemed strange. Miller was also one of the most active subscribers, leaving numerous comments and even reaching out to the group admins via direct messages. He said he wants to help solve the murder, shared his thoughts on some controversial and unclear moments, and put forth his own theories. He demonstrated a high level of awareness, not only with specific facts from the case, but also with the knowledge of the area where the crime occurred. Eventually, George and Jennifer began to consider his behavior quite suspicious. They decided to keep this thought to themselves to not scare him off and try to extract more information. Soon they discovered something else. One of the group members was an expert in genealogy, and she tried to understand Miller's connection to the case. With a simple analysis of his profile, she discovered a very unexpected fact. Miller turned out to be Casey's cousin. After this revelation, George and Jennifer decided to contact the detectives on Rebecca's case and share their concerns about his activity. Police reviewed the case files and realized that Miller's name had been there from the beginning. It turned out he had visited the town around the time of the murder. In 2004, Miller was already questioned, saying he came from Texas to help another relative. He mentioned visiting Casey twice, 2 days before Rebecca's disappearance and the next day. The second time, he didn't even enter the house. Rebecca spotted him through the window and informed Casey that someone was standing there. He went outside, spoke with his cousin for about 15 minutes, and Miller left. Back then, he didn't raise any suspicions, but now detectives were taking a keen interest in him. Digging deeper, they found out that Miller had been a suspect in several cases. In 2002, he faced charges of assaulting a minor, and later for attacking his ex-wife after breaking into her home. However, he didn't face any punishment in either of these cases. Later, he moved to the Philippines, got married, had kids, and worked on offshore oil rigs. Police wanted to talk to him again, but without him being in the US, it was practically impossible. They also couldn't contact him, so they had to wait for him to return home. This happened only in 2020. Customs informed detectives that Miller came back to the US and returned to Oregon, where his mother lived. Detectives called her, but she claimed not to have seen her son for a long time, even though they knew he was in town. Realizing she was lying, detectives decided to go there and bring him in for questioning. Considering there was no evidence against him, the police needed a plan. If Miller had any connection to the murder, they desperately needed to obtain his confession. The detectives decided to play it smart. Detective Mike McNeil, who led the investigation, started the interrogation casually, stating they were just re-interviewing everyone involved in the case. Miller replied that he was willing to cooperate and had nothing to hide. The detective asked if he would be okay with taking a polygraph test upon his return to Arkansas. Miller agreed, and then the detective pretended to call the local police chief, asking if there were any polygraph specialists in town by chance. Hearing this, Miller became visibly nervous and tried to change the subject. Meanwhile, the detective pretended to talk on the phone and said that a polygraph specialist would arrive at the station in half an hour. What Miller didn't know is that the specialist was already waiting in the next room. Despite the fact that the polygraph is a pretty controversial tool and its results can't be accepted in court, the detectives had other goals. This unexpected turn of events could catch the suspect off guard and ultimately lead to a confession. Miller asked if polygraph results were admissible in court, and the detective vaguely said they could be in certain scenarios but didn't specify how unlikely that was. Miller continued to get nervous but agreed to the test, which he failed. The polygraph operator concluded that he had lied about all key questions, including involvement in Rebecca's murder. Detective McNeil continued pressing him and told Miller that experts once again analyzed all the available evidence and found Rebecca's DNA in samples collected from his car. They had searched his vehicle back in 2004 but found nothing and hadn't even taken any samples for further examination. So, there was no Rebecca's DNA found in his car, and the detective deliberately misled Miller. By law, police have the right to use such tactics during interrogation to get a confession. Sometimes criminals indeed decide to confess, and this was Detective McNeil's only hope. Upon hearing about Rebecca's DNA in his car, Miller fell silent. The detective kept saying they had all the evidence and Miller could only make things easier for himself by confessing. And it worked. Miller suddenly said that he didn't kill Rebecca, but stumbled upon her body. According to him, that morning he went to his cousin's house and found an unknown man in a mask standing over Rebecca's bloodied body. Clearly, the detective didn't believe the story and continued to push Miller to tell the truth. Eventually, Miller abruptly interrupted him and said, "I'm just going to tell you. I did it. I'm sorry for what I did." According to Miller, that morning, he went hunting in the woods near his cousin's house. When he arrived there, he suddenly remembered that Casey's girlfriend had come over and for some reason he wanted to talk to her. He knocked on the door and told Rebecca he needed to use the phone. She let him in and Miller pretended to make a call. Meanwhile, Rebecca returned to the bedroom and he began walking back and forth in the living room. Miller claimed he was overwhelmed by an uncontrollable rage and desire to kill Rebecca. So he grabbed a piano leg and went after her. She was lying on the bed and Miller struck her several times on the head before strangling her. He then wrapped her body in a sheet, putting it in his pickup truck and tried to clean the blood from the floor, walls, and bedding with bleach. He then drove to the highway and dumped the body under the embankment. Miller admitted he knew the area well because he went to the school in that town. After hearing his confession, the detective asked why he committed the crime. Miller replied that he just had the urge to kill Rebecca without any reason and couldn't control it. At the end of the interrogation, he once again repeated that he had regretted his actions all these years and must take responsibility. After that, Miller was arrested and extradited to Arkansas. But there, he suddenly retracted his confession and claimed his innocence, which could have jeopardized the case. By law, a suspect must confess to a crime before a judge, especially when there is no evidence against them. There was also one more problem. During Miller's arrest, the police officer didn't finish reading his rights because Miller had interrupted him with a question. All this could have potentially led to Miller's release. However, the judge deemed the recorded confession admissible. Miller had the opportunity to commit the crime, knew his cousin's work schedule, and his statements matched all the details of the crime. It is worth mentioning that Miller initially had a guaranteed way to avoid punishment. When the police called him in for questioning in Oregon, he could have simply refused or walked out of the station at any moment. Considering there was no evidence against him, Miller could have refused to continue the conversation, boarded a flight to the Philippines, and left the U.S. for good, never to be held accountable. Extraditing him without evidence would have been simply impossible, and investigators would have had to accept the fact that they would never solve this case. But Detective McNeil believed that Miller himself had a strong desire to confess. His activity in the online group where he left numerous comments and interacted with the admins spoke to this. If he hadn't wanted anyone to learn about his involvement, the most logical behavior would have been to stay away from this topic. Perhaps he didn't leave the interrogation room or request a lawyer for the same reason. He simply couldn't live with all this guilt. Despite Miller initially claiming his innocence, he changed his mind again and struck a deal with the prosecution. In 2022, he confessed to the crime and received a 40-year prison sentence. But this story doesn't end there. When Miller was behind bars, he suddenly confessed to several more murders. He admitted to killing 5 more women throughout his life, whose names he didn't even know. According to Miller, he would invite those women in his car, drive them to secluded places, and then kill them. He added that he chose his victims based on their appearance. He targeted young, slim, and short women with light hair. Detectives immediately realized that this description perfectly matched Rebecca's appearance. If Miller was indeed a serial killer, it would better explain his decision to kill his cousin's girlfriend as she fits his profile. Considering that Miller worked on oil rigs for 25 years, he had lived in multiple different states and could have committed all these crimes. Police have not yet found any evidence to corroborate his claims, and the investigation continues. It is worth mentioning that there are still supporters of Miller's innocence to this day. Some don't believe he could have committed Rebecca's murder without any motive. Others think that Rebecca's boyfriend could have actually killed her and Miller helped him dispose of the body. Some also believe that Miller didn't kill any other women and made a false confession to the police for some reason. However, all these versions lack any substantial evidence, so Miller's guilt in Rebecca's murder is not questioned at the official level, while further investigations are ongoing regarding the other allegations. Alright guys, share your thoughts on this story in the comment section. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you for watching.